This is the City Council workshop for March 20th, 2024. City Clerk, would you call the roll call, please?
Councilmember Sell.
Here.
Councilmember Papalardo.
Here.
Councilmember Stevenson.
Here.
Mayor Chazet.
Here.
Vice Mayor Butlin.
Here. Okay, the first item on our agenda is the staff presentation of an overview of chapters 4 and 6 of the proposed land development code. And as a reminder for those who may be watching online, we are doing this, reviewing the various sections of the land development code, which we will then amend formally in July. So please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I'm Stephen Bapp. I'm the Growth Management Director for the city. Tonight, we're going to be handling our third workshop out of a series, and we will handle zoning, and we'll also handle accessory, temporary, and structures and special uses. Okay, today's agenda, we'll begin with the introduction, which we've done, and any responses to comments from Workshop 2. I believe we answered those questions from Workshop 2, but if there are any remaining questions for Workshop 2 at this time? Is that me? Hearing none, I'll move forward to our review of Chapter 4. Although we've already discussed form-based codes, and also we've looked at our transit-oriented design in a few years ago, we're going to look at zoning, which is generally handles the majority of the city. Our zoning regulations were kind of scattered all over different sections in our LDC, which would really look good here. Highlighted in red is where, in our current code, where you find parts of the aspects of the code dealing with the physical act of zoning itself. As you see, they're scattered throughout multiple sections. We're going to take these sections and we're going to put them in a logical order, starting with the map, moving with our standard zoning classifications, and then we will handle plan unit development zoning classifications, which kind of consolidates and codifies requirements for future plan unit developments. All right, so we kept a lot of things in the code for our base zoning districts. We added a few, and we did some clarifications. But a majority of the basic dimensional requirements kind of remains the same for most of the zoning districts that we currently have. What have we done? Well, we've clarified language interpretation of zoning classification boundaries. This particularly comes into effect when we have some of our split zoning boundaries with RC and R4. We've clarified definitions for interpreting that. We've consolidated our land use regulations and standards into simple matrices, which are found in the front portion of the chapter. This will provide a citizen, developer, or staff an easy ability to see the core facts of a given zoning district based on the zoning map. We've prohibited flag lots, and we've placed conditions on the use of any shipping containers and other metal buildings used for residential purposes. This is a type of trend that does happen in other parts of the country. We haven't had any, to date, requests to make a house out of a shipping container, but we want to put some regulations in effect there. Also, looking at our city core, we saw that our B4 general commercial had a 1 acre requirement. These are lots found primarily along US 1792. In the FDOT expansion of the highway, many of those lots were reduced to a smaller size and thus creating a non-conforming lot. What we've done is made the zoning requirement more consistent with what is on the ground today. We will propose to permit accessory dwelling units in all zoning classifications which permit single-family homes. And I'll cover that section later in my presentation. Also, proposed changes would permit a live-work unit similar to what we see going into the TOD with residential or on the top, business on the bottom, in several, now in several commercial zones. That's pretty simple for Chapter 4 base zoning. Now, accessory units, temporary and special uses, we had the same problem moving forward. We had references to accessory type structures and units and uses throughout 2, 3, or 4 different sections in our code. Again, consolidated for simplicity. Everything will flow, be found in one chapter. As you see in the chart, it's very inclusive, covers any type of accessory use, any type of accessory structure, any type of temporary use, including some recently added things last year, such as food trucks or food dispensing vehicles. There are probably a lot more proposed changes to our Chapter 6. So we did updates on accessory structures such as the height and setbacks, and we've for corner lots and through lots, which the language was very vague on measuring and determining where an accessory structure could go on a through lot, which is a lot which has 2 streets, one in the front, one in the back. By code, you couldn't have a pool anywhere without a variance or waiver because of the setback from the front structure. Also, we made revisions and clarifications on fences and walls, primarily the type of fencing that can be used in residential districts. We've updated the parking and storage of vehicles, mobile recreation centers, and watercraft to include parking restrictions and parking requirements. This will excuse me, we've also added sections to address outdoor storage and equipment as a principal use in commercial districts. And we had a requirement for portable shelters. We currently allowed 180 days for someone to put up a temporary tent or structure in the front yard for emergency type purposes. Now we've reduced that from 180 days to a more reasonable 30 days, which is much easier to enforce and check on. We've addressed density requirements for assisted living facilities, which was not in the code. We're requiring the business tax receipt for bed and breakfast homestays in the event we have a surge on those. We've updated requirements for communication towers, which is consistent with the Federal Communication Act. There were some regulatory guidelines that came down from the feds that we needed to change our code for. We're adding hours of operation for daycare centers, which previously were none. We're including setback requirements, lighting standards, and noise standards for certain recreational uses. Also, we've added skirting requirements for mobile home dwellings, which was unclear in our current code. We've added screening requirements for outdoor storage units as a principal use. I believe I mentioned that in 2 slides earlier. We've added a new section addressing outdoor service and consumption of alcohol to have codes and regulations for that, which today there were no specific ones. We've added noise restrictions, parking requirements, and buffering requirements for private clubs. And we revised the self-storage facilities to prohibit a business activity within a storage unit. Doing arts and crafts, doing modeling, doing whatever people do in storage units. They would always only be used for storage in our code. Probably the biggest thing we want to address are what's accessory dwelling units. Right now in our code, we adopted the Volusia County Code in 1993 actually. And it had the provision for garage apartments, which is an accessory structure containing a storage area for 1 or more motor vehicles and 1 single-family dwelling, not more than 800 square feet living in that unit. Think of it as the old Brady show where the oldest son lived above the garage. That was the way, the code was written for garage apartments. Since the adoption of the code, Volusia County changed their garage apartments to read accessory dwelling units. other cities' best practices that we followed were we looked at the Gainesville Code for accessory dwelling units. We looked at the DeLand Code, and we looked at the Daytona Beach Code, which I wrote as a senior planner in about 3 years ago. So we're making an accessory dwelling unit the new garage apartment. As you can see the definition, it is a habitable unit ancillarily or secondary to an existing single-family dwelling that has its own separate kitchen, bathroom, and sleeping area. This is a little different than, your workshop that someone may have a restroom in so they can do arts, they can do their woodworking at night or a temporary structure such as that. This is an actual dwelling unit. It can be a detached dwelling. Think of it as like a standalone smaller structure in the back of a home, or it can be within the principal dwelling unit, provided that the unit is distinctly separate and has a distinctly separate entrance from a main entrance. Now I can say the history of garage apartments in the city. I believe in the last 3 years we've probably given out 3 garage apartments, and I think we have interest in another. So it's not a high demand item at this time, but as the housing market can fluctuate up and down, there may be a requirement for multifamily generational housing, with the parents living in one unit and the adult child living in the back, the elderly parents living in the back, or such a type of arrangement. So based on these current trends and what other cities are doing, we want to make an accessory dwelling that's consistent with current trends and also compliant with Florida statutes and other laws. Kind of a summary, I'll cover garage apartments first. Right now the size limit is 800 square feet. Who can use it? Used only by family members of the primary resident. Can it be rented? No. Storage of vehicle requires you to store 1 motor vehicle in the accessory unit, which in fact may be kind of untenable to do in a modern situation. And how many dwelling units would be allowed within the garage apartment? It would be 1. Setback requirements, same as the principal. Sorry, the principal's misspelled, it should be AL at the end. Other regulations, you have to meet the standards for accessory structures. And then zoning classifications where we allow them now, A2, A3, which are our agriculturally zoned districts, rural residential, rural agricultural, R1, R4, and R5. So if you see that that's primarily most of our residential zoning districts already. So as what we propose and what we wish to bring forward when we move to codification is to have 1 accessory dwelling units per lot where a single family dwelling unit would be permitted as a principal use. Again, that would be A2, A3, RR, RA, and other R designated zoning districts. Not the multifamily, but the single family zoning districts. So that's consistent with what we already have. Oops, sorry. One of the criteria is a single family dwelling shall exist on the lot prior to and shall be constructed in conjunction or ahead of the ADU. That would prevent an accessory structure from being on a primary lot, which we don't allow by law anyway. The ADU unit may be attached or detached from the principal dwelling, and the property owner shall occupy either the principal structure or the accessory dwelling unit. We've also added terms of that as far as, conveyance of the property, registration of the property, declarations that the ADU shall run with the land, it shall be binding upon any successful ownership. And we also have requirements for registration of the ADU and inspection of the ADU by our certified officials. As in the garage apartments, the ADU shall meet the dimensional requirements of the principal structure, and the sum of the principal structure and ADU shall meet the lot coverage regulations. So there's no additional zoning activity they're granted for above and beyond what a unit that would be standing alone would be given. A minimum of 1 parking space shall be provided by the ADU, and that parking would be a parking space that would be consistent with our section 7-8, meaning it would be stabilized, meaning it would not be, in certain setbacks, and meaning it would be accessible from, as stated on the slide. Also, the design of the ADU should be compatible with the principal dwelling and the surrounding neighborhood. So if you have a neighborhood of primarily ranch homes, you wouldn't put in something that looks like a volcano or some use that just really would stand out. So that would be part of the inspection and the permitting review. What we do, we say, well, there are different size lot sizes in the city. Some are smaller, some are much larger. So what we're proposing is, based on the lot size, have a scalable ADU. So the maximum ADU would run from 500 to 800 square feet based on the size of the lot. Seeing of the chart, for example, lots larger than 10,000 square feet, you could have an 800 square foot ADU. Smaller lots, like in the neighborhoods you see around east of City Hall, would have a maximum square footage of 500 square feet. Now, if it's a 1-bedroom or studio, the minimum would be 240 square feet, and the maximum for a 2-bedroom would be 390. Where do these numbers come from? These numbers are derived from a coordination with the Florida Building Code for minimum habitable space based on a restroom, based on a cooking facility, based on a sleeping facility. So those are minimums based on those numbers. That's really the changes that we wish to bring forward, and would very gladly entertain any discussion or questions you have at this time.
Thank you very much. City Manager, did you have anything to add on this?
I don't necessarily have anything to add. We've had some discussions, Mayor, and with the Growth Management Director, et cetera, regarding some of our classifications and zoning classifications, and there are a few gaps, obviously,
Yes.
and between, and I'll take you to,
Do you want me to address that one?
yeah, you can.
Certainly. So, for example, our compatibility matrix, which is in the beginning of Chapter 4, which is, I believe, Chart 4-2, it states, if you have this type of zoning, this is the type of future land use we have. Where we find we have a gap is in our agricultural rural, which says you must have, your density is 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres.
Correct.
But then if you crosswalk it with the zoning that's permitted, and this was established in 2012, it was before many of our times. If you look at the type of zoning, it has A2, which is a 5-acre lot. Then it has A3, which is a 1-acre lot, RR, 1-acre lot, and RA, which is a 2.5-acre lot. Now, that doesn't add up to 5.
But that's not how that chart reads, because that was a concern that I had when I read the chart.
I understand that's how the chart reads, so here's the solution. The solution is, when we move forward next year with our comprehensive plan, at that time we can add a new land use classification. There's not a bridging land use classification between a density of 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres and 1 dwelling unit per 4 acres. There's not a 1 dwelling unit per acre or something like that. So we may see, because that's a comprehensive plan, is the density. It's not established in the Land Development Code. So we are going to bring forward some additional land use classifications. So we may have a separate agricultural land use, then a rural land use, or low density rural and a medium density rural, or something like to that effect. So we'll have a density of 1 per 5, we'll have a 1 per 2.5, and then we'll have a 1 per 1 ratio.
And,
So we have to redefine the land use in the comprehensive plan.
yeah, if you look on page 4-13,
Thank you.
you'll find, even though that what he's talking about is the future land use,
Right.
page 413 has the definitions or the zoning of how many lots per acre. And so on that chart there, you'll see RC, or Resource Corridor, is one home every 25 acres.
Right?
Agricultural 2, A2, is at one home every 5 acres. A3 is one home every 1 acre.
Okay.
And RR is one home one home every 1 acre. And then the RA is one home every 2.5.
Okay, that's good, but how does that fit with the chart and matrix that was included with our agenda packet?
Well, that's included in here. What you see on the very first page, 4-1, is the future land use classifications and the zonings that fit into those future land use classifications. The zoning part is on the chart on 4-13.
Okay,
And that's the zoning part of, if you're an A3 or A2, it's either one home per 5 acres or one for one, so.
okay.
And
That was not clear on that chart, and it looked to me like everything that had an A plus RR was all one home per 5 acres.
Right.
That's what that chart looks like.
Right. Yeah.
So
And we know,
I would hope that when we get to July, not sometime a year from now, that the documents would have some continuity and clarity. And if it takes an amendment on the future land use to make these categories make sense, then I would be for it as a comment at the same time. Now, City Clerk, do you have any public participation?
No, ma'am, we do not.
Okay. Councilmember Sell, any questions or comments?
I have a couple. So if I own a home in DeBerry and I have a cousin, Eddie, who comes down every year for the winter, and he brings his RV and he parks it in our yard and he stays there for 6 months, is that something that is considered okay or frowned upon?
it would not, it would be frowned upon.
Frowned upon.
Right.
Okay. Communication towers, we had that one go in down there past Clayton's junkyard that kind of popped up overnight. Would any of this would have prevented that, or at least had us have at least some kind of say on where that would have went?
Well, I don't know the history on the Clayton one. I do know it came in as a surprise to the.
That was part of a national contract and
Right,
had
that
to
was
do
part-
with 5G rollout. I doubt that our city had any ability to weigh in on that.
That's a state of Florida contract, and FDOT can do just about whatever they want to in their right of way and on their property, and so.
Right.
Even after this, it would be still?
Yeah.
It
we
is.
can't- We can't govern state of Florida property. Their laws and contracts.
Supersede ours, yeah.
And anything that's there now in our city is going to be grandfathered in?
If there's any change that would affect that, it would be considered non-conforming. That use and structure would continue. The Federal Communication Act did require us to be consistent with some of their guidelines. So that's why we rewrote that section, and including where towers can be placed, the permit reviews, all these other plethora of fun things that the feds had handed us. And it's cities across Florida and the county have done the same. I did it when I was in Daytona Beach. I had to rewrite that part of the code.
So if somebody owned like 20 acres down the end of High Banks and they wanted to put up a cell tower there, do we have any say in that, or is it just
Well, it
between the
would
property
be-
owner and the business?
Well, we do.
We will.
We do like the height, the setback from the property line, life safety things such as that, permitting. If I own my 20 acres, I'd go to Steve Wood, drop a permit off. They'd have an inspector inspect it for, structural stability. We'd have zoning check it for setback from the property line, height, I guess things of that nature. Yes.
No, thanks, that's all I
Yeah.
got.
Councilmember Papalardo, questions or comments?
Very small question. When comparing the garage apartments to EDUs, one thing I saw that wasn't in the summary was whether renting is permitted under the ADU. Is there a?
Well, we would pose that. Now, if that's a guidance, the council wants to go one way or another, we can implement that at the code.
Okay, understood.
But to answer your question, yes, that's what the new code would
Okay.
propose.
If I don't know if we're taking option comments for possible consensus, but if I could propose an option for consensus to exclude the permittance of renting ADUs.
Well, we'll have to weigh those things, because you turn a single-family dwelling into it could be considered a duplex or a multifamily type of rental. So we have to be careful, and so we'll consider that, eliminating the ability to rent, so that it doesn't turn into a multifamily type of
Exactly.
rental and it stays single-family.
Thank you.
Right, and we'll bring that forward at the next, questions
Workshop.
captured at workshop 3 will be addressed at the beginning of workshop 4.
Thank you.
Yeah,
you.
thank you for the input.
Councilmember Stevenson?
Thank you. Yes, I had to Google search what a flag lot was, and ironically, driving around DeBerry, I'm somewhat familiar with at least a couple of them. So theoretically, if somebody owned one of those lots and was looking to build a house on it, it's no longer allowed. Is that correct?
That's not correct.
Okay.
That would be considered it would be non-conforming use. They
Okay.
could continue, they could build a house there 100 years from now. But we want to prevent a replatting, a lot.
Creating flag lots.
Creating one, yeah.
you.
Creating
There are
flag
existing ones, especially in the western portion of our city.
That's what I just wanted
up
to
by-
clarify.
Up by Fort Florida Road and such.
So it's more-
There were, but
Stopping any additional flag lots from being created,
correct.
as opposed to
and
stopping
anything on the
anybody
ground now, hey, knock yourself out.
Okay.
Want to rebuild your house, add to it, expand it, that's fine.
Beautiful.
Only yeah, but if you try to subdivide that flag lot again to make
Sure.
another flag lot, that would be prohibited.
That makes sense. And then as far as when we were talking about the special uses, I was surprised we didn't hear anything about regulating Airbnbs, even though bread and breakfast was in that section. Is there any interest in regulating Airbnbs in our town, or would that be in a different section and not here?
Well, the state law would prohibit us from
We can't.
regulating
Oh,
from Airbnbs. However, we do have the ability as a town to have a registry
Yes.
of Airbnbs. That is permitted by Florida law.
and would that be in this, in this section?
And registration to get a BTR
Okay.
and so forth, so.
I didn't realize that the state
Yeah.
law has changed on
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
It's gone back and forth since 2012.
Right.
That was the first enacting, and then there's another recent one. I think 2 legislatures ago, they kind of really took our powers, but we do have the power to register, inspect the Airbnb, and have them do a business tax.
And would that be in this section, or would that be in another section? Because I didn't see anything about Airbnbs mentioned.
Well, it wouldn't be mentioned in our line of.
Development code.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Butland?
Yeah, I'm going to go backwards a quick second, starting from the back, or the last things you're talking about. How big is a standard garage? Like a one-car bay garage?
One-car garage space is 20 feet by 10 feet, would be 200 square feet.
Okay, I wasn't sure what the...
Double-car garage would be 20
20
by
by
20,
20.
400 square feet.
Okay. And I also had the question about the BTRs and the Airbnbs and bread and breakfast. I get a lot of calls that they rented my house next door, and then you call up and they're gone. So obviously they rented it short-term. I know there's new legislation on this rental, Florida rent coming in, and I'm sure we'll hear about it later, right, Sherry? How, on the mobile home, a lot of these mobile homes are in an HOA. What are the regulations if the HOA, they say my HOA doesn't care what my apron looks like around my mobile home? Where do we come into that? And when it's versus an HOA?
Okay, so let's take Meadowlake.
Okay,
Meadowlake, for example, does have a base zoning, not a PUD zoning, and has a MH5 zoning. You can have all your mobile home, all your
Manufactured homes.
you can have all your HOA regulations you want, but if they interfere or the land development code, the land development code takes priority.
priority.
Just
Okay,
as we face state law or federal law, our local ordinance would take precedence over any,
okay.
HOA.
And anything that's non-conforming still has to come before council for exceptions, correct?
Or what nonconformities?
Like lots, we were talking about non-conforming lots. I know they've come to
Yeah,
us
there are
and
some, there are
said-
some non-conforming lots. I believe that's lots smaller than 5,000 square feet.
Okay.
Which, in my 2.5 years here, we've had one
Okay.
that wanted to develop along High Banks, and I think they're about 10% under. And even though it was a small difference, we had to come forward to the council for approval to build on that.
And my most recent issue with code enforcement is parking. Is parking in this, the zoning, like no overnight parking, no street parking, and
The
certain
street parking is administered through the code of ordinances.
ordinances?
I
just wanna
don't know
make a
what,
public record
I don't
of
know
it.
what section of that is, 30 or something.
Okay, I just
But
want to
in the
make a
code of
public
ordinances
record that-
handles street parking, you know, registration of pets, all these other
Okay.
city-type businesses that aren't developmental type things. Yep.
Okay, I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, just a few things. I dog-eared several pages. In the first section, we were talking, there was a note about a proposed change, portable shelter duration reduced from 180 days to 30 days. In the case of some sort of massive disaster, like a tornado went through town, and FEMA is involved, FEMA would strongly encourage the ability for a camping vehicle to be used by the primary resident during the reconstruction of the property, and that would be for more than 30 days because those processes don't work quickly. And that may have been the kind of thing that was behind the 180 days. At that point, what I have seen other jurisdictions do is have the elected body make an exception for that particular storm. Is that something we would anticipate?
That is correct. During times of emergencies, that would be declared and listed with other things that would be changed.
Right.
For example, permitting fees is a big thing that happens, and
Sure.
that's usually lifted during a hurricane. That would be another instance. So we would tally up a list and put that out as
Right.
an emergency
Because-
declaration or ordinance.
FEMA distributes trailers for
Absolutely.
just that kind of
Absolutely.
circumstance. So this is routine, as if, this is a routine code for how we build things in DeBerry and what we allow there.
Right.
Moving on to the hours of operation for daycare centers, I admit I didn't see them. Can you tell me what the hours of operation are proposed to be?
And perhaps one of my colleagues can give you the hours of operation. I don't have that fact.
Who was working on hours of operation of daycares?
They would be allowed to operate between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m.
Okay. And how is that different from our current code? We have any hours of operation currently?
No.
No, okay. Absent any compelling input from daycare providers who are licensed, who need extended hours, I would say that I'm okay with that. I do know that there are some specialty in-home daycares that offer, say, overnight daycare for hospital workers that work the night shift and that kind of thing, and so I would want us to have some flexibility, which we would, I think, as an exception to allow something like that with a legitimate purpose, like supporting emergency workers who work 20, different shifts throughout the day. Revise self-storage facilities to prohibit any business activity in the storage unit. Good work. My question is there anything that explicitly says you may not live in the storage unit? In the current housing situation and in some storage facilities, there are people living in storage units in our town. I know of one that was historically that case. I don't personally know of specific ones at this moment that I could go and say, that one in there has so-and-so living in the corner. But it is something that is real in our city, has been in the past. So is there something here that talks about living in a unit? I take it we would also not want people to use storage units as residences.
Not directly, but that's a good point. We will add that.
Okay, look into it. Now, some of the storage facilities have done that with one unit because that is the caretaker, and that way they have somebody on site 24 hours. So it's not quite as cut and dried as it may sound when I bring it up. But we did have one where that resident then was involved in an attack or criminal activity because they were vulnerable and susceptible, being the only person in a storage facility, not a normal neighborhood.
Yep.
So it's a little trickier than it may sound on the surface, but I'd like to see a little more staff work on that before we move forward, because this would be the time to address that if it's something we want to have a handle on.
Okay, can do.
Okay? Are there any other questions, comments, input for our staff as they move forward? And by the way, thank you so much. This is a massive project, and I know that it's the culmination of 3 years' work, but there's still a lot of work between now and when we're done. And I appreciate all of your thoughtful addressing of this code rewrite. Hearing no additional discussion, the workshop is adjourned.